Yes, so my presentation today poses the question to you all, is there space for fun in higher education learning and teaching? I was hoping to be joined by my student partner in this research project, Cara, but with the change in the schedule, she wasn't able to make it today, but I'm sure she'll value your feedback and thoughts that I can share with her following this presentation. So, just to give you a little bit of origin and background to this particular project then. So I was awarded a small pot of money from my university from the Vice-Chancellor's Inclusion Investment Award. And that was following on from a period of absence away from the university when I had my little boy, who's pictured just there. And I've been back now for approximately about a year at the university. And I thought that pot of money was a really useful investment as well, to start thinking about the direction that I want to take my research as well, because I consider myself an early career researcher and academic in educational development, because prior to that I researched young people and alcohol and sociology, so it's quite a different field for me to be working in. And I'm the sort of person who's really influenced by what is happening to me at the time and what's sort of going on. So this research project has been heavily informed by my maternity leave experiences and my experiences of lockdown. So I was somewhat fortunate that I had my baby sort of kind of halfway through. So we had the first 6 months of freedom, if you like, in the real world. And then we went into lockdown. And I became quite preoccupied with this experience and need to help him grow and to develop. And I was really kind of, thinking, how can I get him to crawl? How can I get him to do this and do that? And it started to dawn on me quite slowly that perhaps I was forcing some of these sorts of things, perhaps because of the absence of people and places to go to and so on during lockdown, that I felt that additional pressure to do that as a parent. So it's kind of like I want him to learn, and there was this, I think, an absence of fun potentially for us both, because I took it all so seriously. And that got me thinking about actually my experiences as a teacher as well. And when I first started teaching in higher education, I was very much teacher-centred and I just spoke at the students. But then as I gathered momentum and experience, I actually did loads of active learning, fun stuff with my students. And that made me realise that the best times I had as a teacher and what I think were really good learning experiences for my students were when we were having fun. And sort of in that process of rejoining the university after lockdown and getting thrown into the online teaching world, to be perfectly frank, I wasn't having a lot of fun. I was just finding myself just talking at people. It's sort of almost like I'd reverted backwards. So between all of those things sort of happening, that got me thinking about, do we actually have that much fun as teachers, and do our students have much fun sort of in that learning experience? So I wanted to explore that a little bit further. So like most researchers, I embarked on a literature review to sort of see how the land lays in terms of research in this area. And as I'm probably sure all of you are aware, there's a really huge body of literature around playful learning, and there's a really big community as well that accompanies that, alongside notions of gamification of education and that contentious word of edutainment. So I think that there's a lot of literature that talks about the pedagogical value of play, but I don't think that there's much theoretical engagement with the term fun in learning and teaching. And actually it's something that's used quite interchangeably in the literature and perhaps a little bit uncritically. So you'll see words like joy and humour and play all being thrown about in terms of conversations about teaching. And I think what was coming through for me quite strongly is that there seems to be some assumptions that students are having fun, but I wonder, has anyone actually kind of asked them that question directly, and how do we know that they're having fun? So there's a couple of exceptions in the literature around that. So there's 3 articles that I've just pointed out here. So McManus and Furnham have created a taxonomy of fun, with fun being seen as an activity, a state or a trait, which they explored with undergraduate students when they looked at attitudes towards fun and what they deemed as fun. And similarly, Witten and Langen also looked at student perceptions of the value of fun in higher education learning. So I think that that's the kind of angle that I'm quite interested in exploring a little bit further. So hopefully I can complement what those academics are doing there. And then Ferguson and others have also worked with educational practitioners as well to explore notions of fun, creating concepts, classifications and taxonomies around that. And I think what I've gleaned from that literature as well is that it's actually a very complex and loaded term, and very specific to individuals in terms of what they think of as fun. So complex territory that I think I've entered into. So these are the research questions then that have informed this study. And so what I want to get at is, what do students think is fun in relation to their learning experiences? Similarly, what are teacher perceptions of fun? So I'd like to kind of get at what they think is fun about their teaching practice, but then also mirroring what do they think is fun for their students. And given that kind of contention that I spoke about, that perhaps play is almost seen as fun, I thought that it would be really interesting to talk to playful learning experts as to the relationship there between fun and play in a little bit more detail. So this is the approach that Cara and I have taken to the study so far. So we started off with conducting a student survey, and I'm sure lots of you have experience of this as well, but I found it very difficult in terms of talking to an ethics committee about reaching out to students to gather some data from them. So we've ended up with 78 respondents, and that's from around about 3 universities, but quite focused towards one particular institution. So, quite small numbers, but nonetheless, it's been really helpful in sort of giving a grounding to some of the questions that we could then ask in a student focus group. So the student focus groups haven't happened yet. They're coming in the next couple of weeks. And then I've also been in the process of doing interviews with teachers and playful learning experts. So I've got about 6 interviews that have been conducted so far. So in this presentation today, what I would like to cover a little bit is some of the results from the student survey, and also a little bit of data from the interviews as well. And I don't know if any of you have had experience in this area, but I've downloaded the transcripts from the Zoom interviews or Teams interviews that we did with staff, and the transcript quality is quite poor. So I've tried to started to analyse them, and realised that actually they're going to need a lot more work done there. So I wasn't able to do the kind of in-depth analysis that I would have liked to in preparation for this presentation today. So it's not thorough, rigorous thematic analysis. I've just picked out some things today that I think is useful, that I've kind of gleaned from the interviews overall. So just to give you a little bit of, starting with the student interviews, a little bit of background then. As you can see, the responses are quite STEM heavy. And I think that this will be quite interesting in itself because, and again, I don't know how far you agree with me here, I think there's going to be a real spectrum in terms of STEM of how people deem their disciplinary area as fun. So I think we've kind of got maths and stats, which some people will say like is really troublesome, hard to teach, hard to learn. delivered in a particular way, and then you've kind of got your hands on engineering, building rockets and all that kind of thing. So I think that there's going to be some really fascinating things that kind of come out of that. The respondents mostly came from what you might expect, undergraduate level between first and third year, with a lot of third year students responding. And I think that that's, again, sort of interesting or important to take into account, because potentially third years have had a couple of years of a traditional university experience in terms of their learning, being on campus and so forth, and then perhaps a year of lockdown teaching or online teaching. So I think that the current context that we're in might well shape student perceptions of fun. So I'll bear that in mind going forward with the study. So mostly full-time, and a fairly even spread of male and female students. And again, sort of going in that sort of traditional body of students, mostly younger students that are taking part in the survey. So some of the questions then that we pose, and again, I couldn't share all of the survey data, but I thought I'd try and pick out some bits that I think might be interesting for you all today. So one of the questions was, prior to attending university, did you anticipate having fun in relation to your formal learning experiences? And just to caveat this as well, that we weren't talking about extracurricular things. By all means, if students thought that that was relevant, they could sort of bring that in, but what we're talking about is their learning experience, really. So as you can see, most people are kind of in this middle of the road area, like, yeah, I kind of expected a little bit of fun in terms of my my learning experience, with most people falling into this category here. And then there was a follow-up question of, do you think you should have fun in relation to your learning? And as we can see, things start to shift more towards, actually, yes, I think I should be having fun in terms of my learning. And then a final one, just to sort of build this pattern between the questions. In your actual current experiences, are you having fun in relation to your learning? And as you can see, things are starting to take a bit more of a shift backwards. So in terms of whether they anticipated having fun, it's like, yeah, maybe. Do you think you should have fun? Yes. Are you actually having fun? Maybe not. So I think that that in itself is quite an interesting finding and pattern within the data. For those of you that might be interested, although I don't think that much of this comes as too much of a surprise, here's some reasons that students outlined teachers can make the learning experiences or teaching fun. And I think a couple of things to highlight is just, how much importance is laid upon engagement and interaction. And a really key thing that was coming out was between the teacher and the student and amongst the students. So I think at the moment we're seeing, particularly in the sort of kind of online and hybrid learning context, that the notion of connection, relationships and a sense of belonging is really key for students at the moment, perhaps more so arguably than what it is that they're actually learning. It seems like they're really missing that. And again, something that I think was interesting to ask the students, I said, do you find formative and summative assessments fun? And unsurprisingly, most of the students come back and said no. So we also asked the question, do you think that having fun can have a positive impact on your assessments? And yes, actually, the answer was, we think it can. So I think that this, again, could be a really interesting area for perhaps with someone with assessment and feedback interest and expertise to explore that area a little bit further. Because also in the survey results as well, students said that they found being challenged as fun as well. So these sorts of things are going hand in hand. And again, just to sort of reinforce that point, do you think having fun can help you to learn? We are looking very strongly more towards yes. So I think that tells or paints quite an interesting picture of the value of fun in the eyes of the students in this small sample that we have here today. So just to wrap that up then, those initial findings from the survey, and there was loads of other questions asked about, how fun do you find lectures, seminars, learning new knowledge, learning new skills, etc. That can be useful to ground the focus groups that we're about to conduct as well. So what I would like to glean a little bit more is, although students expected to and wanted to have fun, they might not necessarily be experiencing that. Why is that? I thought that stuff that was coming out about assessment is really interesting, and a lot of the teachers that I interviewed as well spoke about assessment not being fun to create, and that they would like it to be more creative and fun for their students. I think that that's a real interesting area to look at further. And that consensus of, if students are having fun and it can help them to learn, why do they think that is the case? So that gives you a little bit of insight into the student perceptions of fun in their learning experiences. So moving on to the academics' perceptions and point of views. So this is a combination of playful learning experts' views and teachers in higher education. So something that came out strongly from the interviews, which again is very abundant in the playful learning literature, is a resistance to fun in higher education. So this particular playful learning expert said, "You'll have heard this all before, but the whole playful learning arena is full of people's experiences whereby they feel that they have to justify what they're doing because people are sort of belittling it or saying, well, it's not serious, it's fun. And because it's fun, why are you doing it? This should be work and that we shouldn't play, but play is serious stuff. It's all about learning, so why do we dismiss it?" So is there a space for fun? It seems like yes, but there is a lot of resistance to it, and it seems like staff are having to combat that. So there was lots of dialogue about how fun and play is what you do before you come to university, and then it's all serious from there on in. And something else that crept into the conversations off the back of that as well was the student as consumer and student fees. So one person mentioned in that first quote that basically students say things like, "I haven't paid £9,000 to come and play and to have fun. I'm here to learn and hopefully to get a job." So again, there's that kind of student resistance as well that they face in terms of fun, which is quite interesting given that students thought that they should be having fun. But conversely, another academic mentioned that they felt that if students are spending £9,000 a year, that the learning should be delivered in an interactive, fun way. And she's put, and I think in order to kind of keep students' attention, I feel like it needs to go more down that avenue than I think it does so far. So you've kind of got these contradictory views at play there regarding fees. But something that I thought was very reassuring coming out of the interviews, which kind of relates to that notion of student fees, and that fun isn't something that should be done to students, and that it's just a passive reception as part of their learning experience, is that the teachers were saying that for it to be a good learning experience all round, I think it needs to be both parties to be involved and slightly invested in it as well, and willing. It's mainly willing, isn't it? Again, have a go, not to feel too silly and feel safe, and to make those mistakes and try things. And I thought that again is really interesting, because there's a lot embedded in there as well about notions of risk, and they were talking about that having fun can be seen as a bit of risk taking as well. And something that came up quite a bit too was this notion of they feel like fun is there. It's almost like an omnipresent thing that is happening a lot of the time, but it can be something that's really hard to gauge and measure because it's not necessarily something that they ask their students. So going back to the keynote this morning, do we ask students about quality? Do we ask them about whether or not they're actually having a good time in their learning? Probably not, despite the fact it seems to be quite important. So staff were talking about almost like this intuition that they feel that their students are having fun, and that was something that was really important as well. And something that they thought was really valuable when there was fun in the classroom was this idea that it has the potential to unlock further learning or to kind of extend intended learning outcomes. So I thought these couple of quotes were really interesting. So one staff member said, I think it's almost when you kind of like transcend the content, which sounds really weird, but when it's when you're not even really thinking about what you're thinking about, you're just enjoying it and you're in the moment with it, and then you only realise how much of an impact it had later on, which again is kind of what students say sometimes, isn't it? Is that it's only once they finish their degree that they realise the value of the learning and the learning experience. And another teacher said, fun, it gives you that moment to think away from the screen, or away from the books or the pen and paper. It gives you that new setting to get your thinking going again. It can really encapsulate you and you can't get out of it. So if you're at that point, then having this approach, i.e. a fun approach, can unlock it again. So that's the kind of potential that we're seeing there. And then just to finish on a particular ethos that was coming through. So bearing in mind that some of these teachers are quite strong advocates of playful learning and tend to have more active approaches in their teaching, I thought that this kind of sums up their feelings quite nicely. I think you can learn without it being fun, but I think you probably learn more effectively and better if it is fun. And then similarly, someone followed up with sort of this idea of it being a feedback mechanism. So I think of fun as a feedback mechanism. If people are having fun, you've probably done something right, or something has happened that's made that the right thing. So it's a good indication that you've done things right. So just to conclude then, so I think the pandemic has highlighted the value of relationships, belonging and connection in teaching. And I just wonder what you guys think. Does fun give us a further opportunity to build on that? And if it is a joint endeavour to have fun in learning and teaching, can that create a more equitable relationship between staff and students? And then should we be having more fun? And how do we make space for that? So some potentially big questions there.